Really nice to be here. A lot of familiar faces. So thanks for hosting the meeting. Thanks to the organizers. I'll try to do this in 15 minutes. It's going to go fast. There's the topic. Some of the people that helped collect the data you're going to see a little bit of today are listed here. This is really a work in progress, very early data that I want to share with you. I'm not going to give you time to read this, but we have a lot of partner organizations to do the kind of prescribed burning and research that I'll tell you about. Again, many of you are in the room have been involved in some of these burns, and so I hope you enjoy seeing some of the results of your work. By Venturan coastal sage scrub, I'm referring to this entity that has typically purple sage, at least one of the sub-associations, and California sagebrush, often with this chaparral yucca with a drier microsize. It's been recognized, you could also call it the California Sagebrush Purple Sage Alliance. Walt Westman a long time ago tried to break up the different coastal sage scrub communities into regional types. This map just uses ecoregion boundaries to show you the limits of Venturan sage scrub. This is a region with relatively extensive coastal sage scrub and relatively less fragmented coastal sage scrub than the Tioga and the River City regions. This is just to show you Santa Barbara County and the vegetation map, the same one I think that Nicole showed with a different color legend. But you can see the little black outline in the middle of that is the Sedgwick Reserve, 6,000 acres. You see Natural Reserve. It bounds, the north is bounded by the Los Padres National Forest, and the rest of the perimeter of the reserve is bounded by private ranchlands and residential development. It has obviously a lot of fire in the neighborhood. Sedgwick itself has not burned that much. Most of the fires are in chaparral and montane forest in the Los Padres. Much less fire as you get down into the foothill zone of the San Rafael Mountains and the San Ynez Valley. However, there has been increasingly residential and agricultural development in this area, and the management agencies are well aware of the amount of fire in the area, and so they're looking for ways to try to reduce wildfire severity risk. And so the map on the top is just basically a color scheme of wildland-urban intermix and interface up against the Sedgwick boundary. The lower photographs, the one on the lower right, is actually looking north towards the San Rafael Mountains across a wildland landscape of Sedgwick. But when you look to the west of Sedgwick, you're looking into one of these wildland-urban intermixes that Alex will probably tell us about. That actually is the Woodstock subdivision, 2,400 acres of ranchettes. And so the county of Santa Barbara is well aware of some of the risk posed by the shrublands in Sedgwick and has been working with us to try to mitigate that risk. Over the last 8 years or so, we've worked really closely with the folks at Santa Barbara County Fire. It's a contract county for CAL FIRE. Rob Hazard's in the room. I know a number of others who have been just amazing partners to think through how do you, this is the theme of the show here, balance management desires with scientific research needs and also with biodiversity stewardship needs. And so we built a 10-year programmatic permit, a vegetation management plan that tries to integrate both research and vegetation management for fuel management at the same time. That's the green areas inside the Sedgwick boundary. The blue area is another vegetation management plan, or VMP, on the Spalding Ranch and the Midland School properties that I'll also show you a little bit about. Hugh did a nice job of talking about these multiple objectives for which people burn coastal sage scrub. And so I'm not going to belabor this slide except to say there's a lot of insurance scrub that has been burned for livestock forage improvement, for cultural resources historically by the Chumash tribe. The county is more and more interested in and is being funded to do more prescribed burning for fuels management and wildfire mitigation. And then the biodiversity surplus, the things like you might be burning for nuisance weed control and so forth. One of the ways we've thought about our research needs is to what extent are those objectives mutually exclusive or mutually compatible objectives under different kinds of prescribed burning regimes. There's always a lot of risk and work in going into prescribed burning, so we're focused on these topics, fuels, fire behavior, and so forth you can read. I'm going to mainly talk about plant species and communities and fire behavior today. We've had a start into this prescribed burning program with this 10-year permit. 3 burns that we've looked at so far, 2 of them on Sedgwick, 1 on the Midland School. One conducted by Santa Barbara County, the other two are TREXs, Prescribed Fire Training Exchanges, that were sponsored by the Nature Conservancy. They've all happened in the last couple of years. They're relatively small burns. You get the idea of them here from the photos. What we're measuring along the way is a list shown here of pre-burn. This is the beauty of prescribed burning, is it actually happens. You have the advantage of collecting pre-burn data, fire behavior data, and post-burn data to make the connections between all of those. Not an easy thing to do. These are some of the things we're measuring. We have a wealth of really detailed remote sensing data that we're trying to understand as well. This is Mark Mays this is one of his drone images, pre-burn in our TREX 22, and then the post-burn pattern 5 months later, just to show you some of the richness of information we can get here. One slide. Our FEMO crews are people that are actually doing the fire effects monitoring and measuring fire behavior. This is the kinds of things they're seeing. All of our prescription windows are small, narrow, late October through November typically. Low wind speeds. Basically doing spot and strip firing and then backing these fires down the hills typically that have the coastal sage scrub. So flame lengths 4 to 10 feet, 12 feet. They sometimes get higher, like this photograph might suggest. Rate of spread quite slow, so the residence time of the fire in these shrub canopies is long. You're moving only about a foot or two per minute with these burns. The maximum surface temperatures, we're using parameters and we're observing temperatures literally a couple meters apart, less than 100 degrees C and greater than 800 degrees C with some profound effects. This is just a look at one of these monitoring transects at Midland, pre-burn, coastal sage, purple sage, and California sagebrush. The day after the burn, where we're collecting minimum stem diameters and parameters off the ground. And 5 months later, the same site at Midland, dominated by Eminenthe penduliflora. This is one where we had pretty high shrubbery sprouting and a lot of native forbs that came in out of that seed bank, most notably Eminenthe. So with 3 burns, it's a small sample size, and particularly when you see how different the outcomes are for these different burns. It's kind of mind-boggling to me in some ways, but we have a lot to learn. So these are the characteristics of these burns for the Midland, the Sedgwick TREX 22, and TREX 23. Moderate to high severity, if you kind of use the usual metrics of severity. Time since fire for 2 of those burns, 24 years. They both burned in '99 in a prescribed burn conducted by Santa Barbara County. The other area, the TREX 23 burn, by comparison, we have no record of fire in the area since at least probably 1938. It may be more than 75 to 100 years since a fire has at least been recorded in this burn area. You will see that kind of makes a difference. And so some of the metrics, I'm just showing you a few numbers, sorry for the eye test here. Mean cover by different functional types, percent resprouting by the dominant shrubs, and some seedling frequency data. The plot sizes, or the sample sizes are shown along the top there. These are all first year after the burn April surveys. These are all on the same soil, the Chamise soil series. And they're all basically the same elevation within spitting distance of one another. So one of the things I'll point out is the Midland and the TREX 22 burns, which were part of that more recently burned area, pretty similar in their outcomes. A lot of annual grass, but a lot of perennial grass, Stipelepida, and a lot of native forbs. Pretty high rate of resprouting by the shrubs, comparable to what's been reported in the wildfire literature by people like John and others. John Keeley, that is. And pretty good seedling take as well, which is usually observed more in the second year, but we had quite a lot of seedlings. It may be that we had 2 pretty darn wet years after these burns, winter 22 and winter 23. The thing that I'll call your attention to is our most recent TREX burn. It's essentially a grass bed. It's mainly Bromus madricensis. We didn't get any resprouting by the shrubs in our 96 survey plots. We had very few seedlings, and we had very little native flora coming back in that burn. So it's a really kind of a puzzling contrast in outcomes between these burns. Similarly, we had much higher biodiversity in the first 2 burns. So these are species accumulation curves, just taking 1 square meter plots and accumulating the species optimally. So our Midland burn, up to 40 species with an average of 8 to 10 species per square meter. This is comparable to the literature for the wildfire surveys as well. Again, John's probably comfortable seeing these kinds of numbers. And then Trax 22, a little bit less, but the 23 burn, we're getting 3 to 4 species per square meter, mostly ruderal grasses. So it's a puzzle. One other thing I'll mention, just as a little side story that we're working on, Carla D'Antonio and Joanna Tang and others are thinking of helping us think this through. All of these burns have a really distinctive pattern of very fine-grained modeling of bare soil and then annual grass patches. You can see it in these photos here. The grass patches are the gaps between the shrubs in the pre-burn fuel bed. The fires are mainly burning through the grass beds and then flaring up into the shrub canopies. The fires are propagating by the grass bed, something that Harold Biswell noticed as well. So what we're thinking is it's probably hot spots and cool spots at a very fine scale in these fires, and our videos are suggesting that as well. You can really see that pattern here, where you look across the scrub, that was purple sage and California sagebrush, light areas that were the gaps between the shrubs and the pre-burn canopy. The dark areas are the shrub understories, and that same area 5 months later, and that pattern is reflected in the post-burn microscale vegetation diversity. And in a way, it's quite interesting. We've done a little bit of work on temperatures, and the parameters only a meter or two apart in paired gap shrub understory measurements, and the shrub understories are significantly higher than the gaps even within a meter or two. So now Carla and Joanne are growing out some seed bank samples. We're going to try to understand a little bit more about what happens to the seed banks pre-burn through fire into post-burn. This is something Dennis Odian did with the Maritime Chaparral nearby. And I think it's a similar story, but it's much more dramatic in these more open coastal sage shrub systems, the sort of canopy understory and gap contrast. So I think I would just focus on that primarily, that compared to the chaparral, evergreen chaparral, these Venturan scrub systems are much gappier than they look like when you just look across the canopy. There's a lot of grass understory in many of these systems. There's a strong coupling then to a very fine scale fire behavior heterogeneity. And then there's also this pattern and process coupling that's going on between pre-burn, fire behavior, and post-burn plant communities. The mechanisms of scrub recovery are in these prescribed burns so far are pretty much what's been reported in post-wildfire surveys of scrub recovery in coastal sage scrub, primarily through shrubbery sprouting, some seedling recruitment, particularly in subsequent years. But we did not get resprouting in one of these burns at all, and that's a real puzzle. I know, John, you've talked about and written about older shrubs. Some of the older sages and sagebrushes may not have the same resprouting capacity, so maybe we're looking at really old stands of coastal sage scrub compared to stands that were rejuvenated 24 years ago. I just don't know. But it leads to a lot of questions about the resilience of this Venturan scrub under different kinds of prescribed fire regimes, and that's what we're going to be studying over the next few years, including a lot of work, and Max and Shane are in the audience. We're going to try to get a little bit more analytical and experimental with manipulating fire severity gradients and things like that, using burn boxes and more fuel removal treatments and things like that. I'll just finish there. If I have time, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.